Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my thoughts, kind of recap of the San Diego Comic-Con Avatar panel, the Avatar Legacy panel, the Avatar Publishing panel, whatever way you want to call it. So, we did get news, and at least some of it is, positive to a certain degree. We got at least a new comic announced, but it was not the comic that everyone was expecting. We got a new Avatar comic announced, but we didn't get the Korra comic announced. So, major negatives on the Korra side of things. Just nothing seems to be able to go right for Korra. Like, no merch, no comics now in years, kind of mainline comics. I just do not understand what's going on here. But I have to say, in general, it seems like they just did not attempt to deliver news at this panel outside of the one Dark Horse comic announcement. It seems like Magpie had basically nothing to say. Abrams similarly didn't really say anything. But this is where the communication problem comes into play. They don't stream these panels. Officially, they don't particularly recap the actual details of the panels. Officially, we get the really obvious major announcement, like the new comic, the cover, was talked about. But the actual minute-to-minute details of like what the creators are saying, we didn't really get that here. And so there's a huge amount of time at this panel where we just don't really know the details of what happened. But I think we have the core points here, and that is just that for most of the publishers, there was no news. And then Dark Horse, while they delivered in one way, they super let people down in every single other way. And even the new book is kind of like, what? It's so confusing what's going on here. I would definitely say, like, when the person live tweeting the panel mentioned that it is the end of the panel, I was stunned, and I absolutely got the impression everyone else reacting to it was absolutely taken aback that there's no Korra comic announcement. That's all. This San Diego Comic-Con, you have nothing to announce. What? And it gives you the impression that, like, unless they really deliver at New York Comic-Con in October, 2024 is not looking great for publishing. Because it doesn't seem like we're going to be getting a novel next year. And the comic lineup for next year doesn't seem like it's there. And I just get the general impression that, like, Avatar Studios has meant basically nothing to publishing going forward. Like, it especially when it comes to Dark Horse, it just seems like Avatar Studios has hindered what Dark Horse is able to do more than helped them. And I don't know if it's just a lack of ambition on Dark Horse's point, just a lack of knowing what they should do as comics from Avatar Studios' point, but it's very confusing and all over the place. So let's just kind of go through this. So everyone who attended the panel got the free RPG Day dice from Avatar Legends, so the Black Twee and Law dice, which is nice. Here was the initial kind of title panel where, like, you had the main publishers, but also Nickelodeon. Now, that ended up amounting to very little. That Nickelodeon, I think, is just there to represent the publishers of the smaller books, like I Am Aang, Heart of a Hero, that sort of thing. But yeah, not much of a panel as well. Our main moderator, FCE, and then two people who I don't particularly know too well. So someone from Dark Horse Comics, who I don't think is one of the creators, so I'm guessing is maybe a marketing person or something like that. I don't know. Jeff Whitman, like, people got a bit excited because, like, oh, Paramount Studios. He's just the director of, like, publishing at Paramount Studios. So it's just kind of one of the kind of slightly higher up people involved in publishing, nothing related to specifically, like, Avatar Studios animation stuff. So I don't know what happened with the kind of panel here where, like, they couldn't get Faith Erin Hicks, Peter Wortman, any of the others, but apparently some people got in by video. We don't know who, because again, so much of the panel was kind of glanced over in terms of the details. So I'm very confused about the specifics of who talked, who didn't talk, that sort of stuff. There was some technical details. FCE talked about the new Yang Chen novel, Legacy of Yang Chen. And even this, we don't have a clue. Was anything said by Abrams about like the future of the novels? Don't think so, because FCE, like, if there's one thing FCE, he's not going to ever deliver to you a piece of news that you don't really know about. He seems very careful about that sort of stuff. So we'll get into an interview that came out earlier this week with him a little later that's kind of interesting. But again, it seemed like, at least to this person live tweeting, nothing that was said here was of any note. So it doesn't seem like he directly was just like, hey, I'm done with the novels now. Otherwise, I assume that would have been directly mentioned. Nothing seemingly said about Book 5 of Chronicles of the Avatar. Just that, and then we move on to Heart of a Hero. I'm going to skip past this because we already know about this. We've seen the entire book because the publisher just put it up on Edelweiss for some reason. Just like, here's the print file, basically, for the book. All 40 pages. Who knows why they did that? It's still up there now if you want to look at it. It looks nice. I'm probably going to grab that book when it actually does release, but there's nothing to say about it here. I Am Zuko, so the follow-up to I Am Aang. So we have confirmation. Bao Lu is back as the artist, and here is the cover. So very nice. It's a very cheap book. It's mainly for young readers, but I think a lot of people really like the art, and that's the whole idea here. So January 2024 for that. Very nice. And that is one of the few pieces of news that actually came out of the panel, was they actually revealed the cover here. It hadn't been released previously. Then we get into the Dark Horse announcement. So they want to explore characters that didn't get as much time in the show. An upcoming story is about June and Iroh. So, But then we got to this, and it is this. Dark Horse Comics sneak peek. The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer. So you can see the cover here. I'll show you the cleaner version of the cover in just a second. But it is our standard ATLA team these days, Faith Erin Hicks, Peter Wortman, Adele Matera, in consultation with Avatar Studios. Expected summer 2024, more details to be announced. So, what? What a character selection to go for immediately next. I don't think anyone called this. Like, I think there was obviously a demand to a certain degree for an Iroh-focused comic. But I'm not sure if many people would have predicted that they would actually go ahead and do an Iroh and June comic. Nyla's also there, as you can see the cover. I'm not sure I particularly get what the whole idea here. Here's Nickelodeon announcing it with the actual image, of course, confirming all these details here. I don't know what to say about this one. This is basically your second potentially in a trilogy of one-shot comics for Avatar, and this is your follow-up to Azula in the Spirit Temple. Iroh and June? Like, I like June as a character. I'm not sure the Iroh-June dynamic was what I super latched onto from that episode, so I think that's weird that they're trying to bring that back up again a little bit. It could be fun, but like, of all of the things to focus a comic on, and when there are so many things that like should be focused on in the comics, this is just confusing to me. Because this is a dynamic that they had a chance to return to in ATLA. Remember in the finale, June guides Team Avatar kind of minus Aang to the Order of the White Lotus kind of camp, but she leaves before the owl actually arrive. So they seemingly didn't particularly create a particular importance of these two characters meeting. Otherwise, why wouldn't you have had a kind of fun scene of like Iroh and June even having a tiny little kind of glancing moment if you wanted to do anything there? Look, I get it, you had more important stuff going on at the time, but if this was a minor character dynamic you were going for, I assume you would have done it. Now, again, we don't know what the premise is for this comic, how these two encounter each other again, why they apparently like team up on some sort of a mission. We don't know. Like, what's going to lure Iroh to go on some sort of a mission outside the tea house? Like, why? Now, there's a way to make this interesting, like if it relates to his backstory. If you actually maybe focus the comic more on June with strong support from Iroh, then you can maybe turn June into a character who is a lot more interesting than she kind of currently is. And I'm all for that. I just feel there are better options with the comic, like to do stuff that's more along the lines of Azula in the Spirit Temple, of like addressing some of your open comic plot threads, like Mei and Zuko's like relationship. We have to come back to that. It's been years. Are you going to continue that? Hello? Sokka could do with some focus. There's so many other things that I think like could work. And I think I'd be more okay with this in a way if the scheduling was a bit better. But because it's going to be like a year until this book comes out, I just think it's a kind of crazy to have them be so separated and then have very like super specific and not the most important kind of dynamics going on. That's kind of weird to me, because I think we need to address summer 2024 as well, because if this is scheduled in the same way as like previous comic trilogies have been, as the Katara, Toph, and Suki books were, there's they seem to have like double or maybe even triple the amount of time in between comics here as they have had before. Like the flow that they've been in the past is that you get one comic, 4 months later, the next one will come out. 4 months later, the next one will come out. Maybe, you know, small delays happen and stuff gets pushed out by like a week, maybe a month in there. But still, like you're at typically 4 to 6 months between comics when you're in the middle of a run, basically, of the comics. So the idea that like the Azula comic was initially scheduled for summer 2023, missed, like heavily delayed into now October, November 2023. Even so, it's still a large gap, because if you go with the original date, it's a year between books. If you go with the current date, it's still like, what, 9 months basically, give or take, because we assume by summer they probably mean July, because they don't tend to typically go for the very beginning of summer. So this is probably more like July what they mean by this. So, you know, a couple of months still for 2023, and then 7 months into this year. It's a huge gap of time between books, if they're going to be having such clear giant differences between them. So I don't understand that scheduling aspect. Like, I don't want them to rush the books, of course, and if that's the schedule that they have, that is the schedule that they have, but it is different than what we know before. It is different than the schedule this specific team has had on these books before. I'm just a bit confused about this, ultimately. So there's that. So yeah, new Avatar comic. They do have a sneak peek here of some concept art of a place called Daxia Harbor, which I guess is going to be the main location in this book. Looks pretty nice, you know. Here's the harbor, ships coming in, a city kind of built up, a kind of embankment kind of type area here. Looks kind of cool. I wonder what the details are again about how these two characters end up together and here, and what's going to make all that happen. And then it just cuts from Dark Horse into Magpie, which is just that they showed the role-playing game. They're working on a Republic City set right now, which is what they talked about at New York Comic Con last year. It's the Republic City book is literally meant to come out at some point within the next, like, what, 8-9 days. It's a June PDF release, so anyone who's pre-ordered this is going to get this book in a couple of days. Now, I'm not aware that they've delayed this. They've not emailed me or anything like that to say it's been delayed, so I assume they're sticking to July release for this book. What's going on? What was mentioned here? Is this just someone who's not super familiar with the RPG, just not knowing what is or isn't new? But it seems like they didn't talk about the Spirit World book, which is the follow-up to the Republic City book, so it doesn't seem like there was any news. Now, maybe they showed them stuff from the Republic City set that, like, is new, but that's more of maybe, like, preview page style things, which isn't, like, the most important. But then, the panel just ends. Like, everyone was stunned when this happened, because there was still like 10 minutes left in terms of the time slot for like the room. Like, it's meant to be what, 12:30 to 1:30, and it was at like more or less like a quarter past when the this happened. And there was the like 10-minute technical delay earlier on in the panel, so they just didn't seem to have anything planned here. I don't know if there was like a Q&A that they did afterwards, but it seemed like this was just the end of the panel. Not sure what went down here, like, at all. There was clarification a little bit later on that in the videos, they showed different people who worked on the comics, and the Korra comic apparently was mentioned in one of these videos, but there were no images and there was no release date or any like updates on it. So it was, I guess, acknowledged, but no details. Again, if we had the actual recording of what was said, we might feel a little bit different about it, because they could have talked about it in a way where like it feels a little bit more positive about it, even though it's not like a proper announcement. But just the fact that we don't actually know what was said, it's hard to kind of judge like if it meant anything or not. So that's all that. And just to kind of reference like what we know about the Korra comic and why there was excitement going in. So this was Comic-Con last year, San Diego Comic-Con last year. Also confirmed, more Legend of Korra comics are on the way from Dark Horse. A new trilogy, creators include Kiku Hughes and Alexandria Monique, will begin in 2023. So that's not happening at this point. If the newly announced Iroh and June comic is middle of next year, there is no way a unannounced Korra comic is hitting 2023. So what's happened here? Somewhere in the middle of all of this, this book has seemingly fallen behind by what seems like, 6 months? 9 months? Something like that. It seems like it's literally fallen behind by that much. And I think that's just kind of like crazy that like theoretically the earliest now at this point that we might see the first Korra comic is like, I'm going to guess like October maybe 2024. So like over 2 years after its initial announcement. That's just crazy in my mind. Like that speaks to something going on behind the scenes with Dark Horse and Avatar Studios that we don't know about. That like Alexandria Monique is kind of the kind of new superstar artist. I don't think we know about like scheduling problems. So I don't know, but it's to the point now where like we have to be like, wait. Is this the second theoretical planned Korra comic trilogy in a row where there are massive problems now happening behind the scenes? Because let's not forget that in the last mainline Korra comic, so ignoring Patterns in Time and Free Comic Book Day books, was Runes of the Empire Part 3. That came out in early 2020. That is 3.5 years ago at this point. Last mainline Avatar comic was 3.5 years ago for Korra comic. That's an unacceptable amount of time for the series that already doesn't have a lot of comics or content, and now it's that time period is extending hugely. Like it's going to be 5 years between mainline comics by the time this all pans out. What's going on here? And again, like I said, there was meant to be a Korra comic trilogy that was roughly meant to be announced towards the end of 2020, early 2021. They had all but confirmed this thing. Like Rachel Roberts was out there in interviews kind of mentioning Korra content that people are going to love. Nothing happened. Because what happened in or around early 2021, late 2020, Avatar Studios formed. And it seemed like this Korra comic trilogy just disappeared behind the scenes. And then we had to wait until basically this announcement here last year, where they confirmed another group of Korra comics being on the way. But now, something's happening here. Now, maybe it is normal. Maybe they just announced it incredibly early back here. The Korra comics have unfortunately had a bit of a history of them making maybe announcements and it not panning out. Because remember, I don't remember the specific details of this, but the Korra comics were initially like announced way before we actually ended up getting the one that we got. We had a different artist initially on board, who, I don't know what happened, she dropped out, and then Irene Co. had to be announced quite a few months later. So the initial Korra comic Turf Wars was also kind of heavily delayed. So this has just followed Korra the whole way through for some reason. problems behind the scenes. I'm not sure what's happening here. My assumption probably would be just that, like, I don't know, are they struggling about what stories to tell and what characters to focus on? Is the Mako information from New York Comic Con last year still actually valid and in place? Because it was confirmed by multiple people last year. There's another trilogy of Korra comics on the way. The first story will be focused on Mako. That's all they can say for now. And then Kachi, known fan artist, said, too early for a Korra trilogy update, but the first story will focus on Mako. So they had an update for us at the following convention last year, but now, like 9 months, a year on, they really don't have an update other than, I guess, maybe like acknowledging it is still a thing. I don't get it. I just fundamentally do not understand why this seems to be so complicated. Either way, it points out that communication is terrible. That Dark Horse just are so bad about communicating about Avatar stuff to Avatar fans. And then even if you give them the excuse of, well, they can only kind of say what Avatar Studios allows them to say, well, there's another big problem. Avatar Studios also doesn't really have a relationship with the fan base because they are hiding behind, like, we're not ready to talk yet type stuff. And so it's just creating this growing frustration now that, like, I think it even says it here. This tweet also from New York Comic Con last year. Comics and novels will be the main source of universe expansion for now. Publishers can't speak to what they're working on at Avatar Studios in terms of shows and movies. Personally, fine. Now, again, we don't have a lot of clarification on this, but that is almost like implying that, like, wait, is maybe the reason we're seeing delays in the kind of content coming out now because maybe there is a bigger plan in place to have a lot of books and publishing happen, like, to coincide with the movies and TV shows when they eventually launch for Avatar Studios. But this is beginning to become quite questionable. Like, yes, but it also now seems like 2024 doesn't really have much Avatar content, and Avatar Studios certainly is not accelerating the amount of Avatar content that we are getting. So yes, we're getting universe expansion, but, like, it's not the main source. And it's making Avatar Generations look incredible that they are able to do as much as they are doing. And that's why I'm always kind of highlighting that game, is because it is probably the most regular source of new Avatar content that we have right now, when Dark Horse just seemed to be fumbling every possible opportunity here. I just don't really know what to say anymore about this. I don't want to be super negative about, like, the Iroh and June comic, especially when we don't know what it's really going to be about yet, but it is certainly not one that makes me immediately be like, I'm super, super excited for this. I'm intrigued, but I'm not, like, absolutely eager to get into that one in the same way I was the Azula comic and stuff like that. So I think that's a bit of a weird step in a weird direction to go with this as the next book, because it certainly doesn't give you confidence in terms of there being a broader goal for the comics, which is kind of what we've been looking for. This very much just seems like the next book they randomly happened to decide to do this, and, like, no one asked, like, a single fan, is this what you want, in the whole process. And it's so confusing and frustrating, because it just feels like as fans we're not being listened to, and especially for big fans of Korra, people waiting for Korra stuff, it's just like nothing is going right for Korra. There's no merchandise coming out. Even merch that was scheduled to, like, be announced or come out still hasn't been announced. Now no new content for the kind of foreseeable future from at least the comic side of things. What are you meant to feel as a Korra fan with the treatment that's happening here? No idea. And then we'll end with just this interview here with Nerds of Color. So this is, I think, the main interview FCE has done with for Legacy of Yang Chen. There's nothing too much to say about the main kind of thing, because most of it's just marketing for the actual, like, book itself. So the big thing is probably just down here. So much like how when Yi rapped on the Kyoshi duology, At the time of being interviewed for the Nerds of Color, he doesn't know as to whether he'll continue on with writing for the series. However, if he had his choice of what Avatar to tackle next, he named Avatar Zito as a possible candidate. So that's one of those things, is kind of interesting. It's one of those kind of ones where, like, I find FCE to be very non-committal when it comes to a lot of stuff like this. Like, it feels like you would never just get a random drop of information from him in a way. Like, it was such a surprise in a way that he just directly announced effectively Yang Chen Book 2 in the interview last time out. I wouldn't read too much into this when the acknowledgement in Legacy of Yang Chen and then what he posted on Instagram feels so much like a kind of goodbye for now type thing, where, like, it would be weird if in like 6 months, a year, we find out about the next Chronicles of the Avatar book and he's writing it. And it's like, wait, but you said this in the acknowledgement and the afterword. And it's like, what's going on here? Like, and again, it's like, it doesn't speak to any sort of like future planning on the novels, that like he theoretically at this point doesn't have a clue what's going on next with the novels, if he can come back and do another one, even if he wants to. Like, what does that say? That, like, he's maybe not allowed to say anything, that there is no immediate plan to do a 5th book. That doesn't speak very highly about Avatar Studios either, that people want the content to be very, very regular, but here is another kind of missed opportunity and another, like, year gap, theoretically, with the novels, and then we don't even know when the next one will be announced, and that's super frustrating. So 2024 just, it doesn't right now look incredible as like a kind of highlight year. Now maybe towards the end of 2024 we'll start to get into Avatar Studios hype, but in terms of any hope that publishing is beginning to get back on track, certainly this San Diego Comic-Con does not give you confidence as an Avatar fan that like there is a really in-depth plan for publishing, because this seemed like amateur hour. Like they don't have the stuff ready. No clue what the idea here is. So gonna wrap it up there. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this stuff. So yeah, no Korra comic, but Iroh and June comic coming out middle of next year, like an entire year away. What are your thoughts on this? And just, yeah, a pretty disappointing publishing panel, and I don't know, I felt like I went in with the right expectations and still came out disappointed. So I do very much see this as they failed the fans. This is not a case of, I think, fans getting overexcited over nothing. There's been announcement that these things before. They delivered with the Azula comic announcement last year. They just didn't quite get it right this year based on expectations, because there's no communication with the fans. So there's my thoughts. Let me know below what your thoughts are, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.